I think the easy statement about everything we make is, does this start a dialogue? Is this going to start a conversation? And a lot of our creative process fully wraps up in an idea that usually formed from, this is interesting, how can you build a format, whether it's scripted or non-scripted, around this type of a thing to then start a conversation. And that goes across comedy, drama, long form, short form, of like, we love to start conversations, hence this whole franchise we built off of reaction and a lot of other series that are all about people's opinions and talking. We say a lot like, there's so much communication now, but nobody actually talks. And that show has been around for so many years now, yet it's still so popular, and it shows continually that dialogue, that conversation. We want to hear each other talk. We want to hear someone's opinions, see myself in them or not, and then start that conversation. So I think the creative process comes from a place of dialogue.
How do you think about topicality? How does that fit in? Like what people are talking about right now?
That's, go ahead.
Yeah, it depends on the show, which is great because, I mean, when you build out the production models of what your shows are and how you're able to execute them, especially on the budgets that are allowed through the really awful CPMs that places like YouTube have, there's different types of formats that you create, some that are very based on topicality, and that's huge. Like we have all these different ways of diving in and doing research to find and surface the topics that people are talking about and that would make for a great episode.
And trying to find things that can become a great episode that people might not realize is happening.
Much, yeah.
But combined with innovative production models that we've been doing for 13 years, but how do you do this on such a low scale with high quality and make all this content? It's gotten very, very complicated, and our teams are on staggered schedules, and editors work later at night because we turn things around in a day and a half, and it's a whole process of how do you start that process and finish that process? And it gets harder as you grow a larger and larger team because process becomes in your way in a lot of ways.
And you do like one of the biggest like tentpoles of like creating a kind of like Hank was saying of like, why do they want to come for the next one? Content, like one of the tentpoles is of shareability is topicality and things that are in the zeitgeist and that people want to be talking about right now. And so you create, you know, a lot of content around that idea, but you also make a lot of shows that don't necessarily need to have that because they are great shows. And thanks to the television network effect that you create on your platform, whether it's YouTube or Facebook or et cetera, you now have an audience that is massive that wants to watch these bigger tentpole shows that you create, but then that allows you to make the animated show that now can still get, you know, 500,000, 1 million views because that audience is loyal and they want to see other things that you're making. And that's why the company's been able to be successful in different ways, is creating some of these very big shows.
And tapping into things that I think impact globally, and that's you know, the distribution on YouTube, we're 50-50, 50% in America, then 50% everywhere else. So that's a lot of times on our mind in terms of, well, is this going to be something that everyone understands that is very global? If it's not, how do we make sure that we have some parallels to people if they don't live in the United States? And on the flip side, if we're going to cover something from somewhere else, which we do a lot, it's going to be something that we think is highlighting that region in a different way that's interesting for our American audience to then also understand and then be like, oh, that's interesting, let me check that out.
Yeah, I'm interested in how you're thinking about developing globally, because yeah, we've been global on YouTube since day one. But now that you've got a company and you're creating different franchises and formats and in different areas, how are you thinking about creating for a global audience? And are you looking at things in a regional point of view or a particular cultural point of view, or is it trying to create in the way that you talked about where let's make sure we have some touch points so that it works?
The touch points are kind of important because the audience is just so big, but there's kind of three quick examples that have worked. One from the very, very beginning, and then two that a little bit more recently that we have like kind of case studies that we didn't like do to be case studies, but ended up becoming case studies. So one is K-pop, Korean pop music, which has been this massive thing that's just gotten bigger and bigger over the years. But in the first like 6 months of the Kids React format in 2010, we started seeing from the audience itself, K-pop, K-pop, K-pop. So it was surfacing from the global audience, being into this thing. We dove into it and then have really highlighted a lot of Asian music over the years that has put us in a lot, and I see it all the time. People are like, how'd you get into K-pop? And you just see our shows across a lot of it for people more in the US, which probably is not the case depending on where they were in other places. So that's been on one side. And then what's been interesting is we do look very specifically for like what are things that are getting lots of views in other countries to then see why.
That aren't necessarily getting views in the
America,
US.
right.
They're getting views and going viral in some other country.
And what is it, and is there an interesting story to be told that it isn't just something kind of unique to just the region. There's something a little bit larger there. So two different things happened. One happened with a Brazilian pop star named Anitta, who was blowing up, and we kind of did research on her and saw she was kind of Miley Cyrus-esque, and there was parallels to talk about there. And when we covered that episode, it was a very big episode generally, and introduced a lot of people to her. But then our analytics, I think all said and done after a few weeks, there was 3 million views, 1.5 million from the US and other countries, 1.5 million in Brazil. And that, ever since, has put Brazil in our top, like, 8 most viewed areas because it became a conversation point of how we were highlighting them, and there was an excitement that got built in Brazil. And the same thing more recently happened in the Netherlands, where there was this great piece that I'm sure a lot of you saw, because it went pretty viral, that...
America first, Netherlands second.
Yes. So we found that video, and one of the more complicated things to do now is how do you discuss President Trump? Very hard to do with YouTube comments. So this video was like, well, this is a good way to kind of test, well, this seems the right type of thing to start a conversation. What do teenagers think right now? We can use it to talk about the US government and things like that, but at the same time have this lens from a different country, and that's a great conversation starter. And that happened, and the same thing happened in terms of just how many people in the comments just filled with everybody that was like, you covered us, is kind of what it felt like. And then it got put on a bunch of different websites out here, and I don't know, the multi-millions have seen that Teens React episode here, and now there's a lot more people from the Netherlands that are watching us. So it's an interesting thing to kind of go region by region and try to find that thing that is important to them or interesting to them to shine a spotlight, both to start that dialogue and conversation from other places to now be more aware of other places in the world, while at the same time bringing those people into our community, which is what we really want, a large global dialogue.